Hello, I'm Richard Seltzer. I'd like to share with you a romantic story from my book Together Tales, which will soon be published by All Things That Matter Press. In the book, the narrator, in the midst of the pandemic, thinks back to a 7-day Caribbean cruise he was on a few years before, on which 8 people shared a dinner table and swapped stories every night. The narrator laments that with social distancing and mask wearing, love at first sight may no longer be possible. Imagine that you are on that cruise and that this story is told by someone sitting across from you at the dinner table. I dream of Lucy. Pete is a software engineer working for DEC, the mini-computer company, which was once the second largest computer company in the world with 140,000 employees. It's now defunct. At DEC, he had access to the internet in the days before the web and public access. Back then, the internet was little more than email and file transfer among government agencies, research universities, and computer companies. Of course, the conversations that took place over that first global network were not just limited to business. News groups grew, which connected people with common interests, and those interests spanned the full range of human activity, including the paranormal. Many people were fascinated by the concept of dream space, a variation of the traditional belief of Australian Aborigines, that when we sleep, we all go to the same separate realm of being, where dreams can be shared and people can meet, and what happens there can impact ordinary life. Thousands of people with internet access agreed to participate in a global experiment to try to prove the existence of dream space. Everyone was supposed to, before going to sleep, imagine an old-fashioned phone booth in the desert near Alice Springs in the Australian outback. Beforehand, they were all supposed to shift their normal sleep habits so they could all go to sleep at the same time, approximately, wherever they lived. Since the bulk of the participants happened to live in the Eastern time zone of the U.S., the base time there was between midnight and 3 a.m. That worked out to between 1:30 and 4:30 p.m. later that same day in Alice Springs. In their dreams, they were all supposed to go to that imaginary phone booth, to leave messages there, and to look for and memorize messages they found there. The following morning, anyone who saw and remembered a message was supposed to contact the person who wrote it for confirmation and then notify the entire news group. Pete was psyched. He read Bruce Chatwin's book, Songlines, about the Aborigines, their way of life and their beliefs. For the month before the experiment, he practiced focusing on a single object as he was falling asleep, in hopes that that object would become embedded in his dreams. Also, night after night, he set his alarm clock for 3 a.m. He was pleased that the alarm often woke him in the middle of a dream, and he built the habit of immediately writing down every detail he could remember of that dream. This was in the days before the web, so you couldn't just go online to see images of phone booths. Instead, he bought a large format printed book of photographs of phone booths. On the night of the experiment, for hours before midnight, he stared at every page of that book over and over again. He fell into a dream that began with him in a phone booth in New York City. As a 6th grader, on a school outing, he had gotten separated from the group. He had been staring at a cute girl when he should have been climbing onto a bus. This was before there were cell phones, and he had been well trained not to talk to strangers. He had walked for blocks until he finally found a phone booth with a working phone so he could call for help. And he stayed there in the booth, afraid to go out on the street again until his dad came to pick him up. To keep from panicking, while he waited, he read repeatedly all the graffiti and names and phone numbers on the walls of the booth. His dream during the experiment began with him in that same phone booth and reading that same graffiti while busy people rushed by on the sidewalk outside. Then the dream suddenly cut to a phone booth in the desert. It was a different phone booth. The graffiti and names and numbers were gone. The telephone receiver was missing, and the metal-clad wire that had once connected a receiver to the phone box hung loosely, uselessly. The phone could never have worked because there were no wires extending out of the booth, and there were no telephone poles anywhere in sight. It was nothing but flat desert as far as the eye could see. He felt like he was in a Stephen King movie. Then he realized that there were dozens of pieces of paper stuck to the outside of the booth. He stepped out to look at them. The paper was wet. It must have rained. It may have been one of the legendary mid-desert downpours in which people sometimes drown. The ink on the pieces of paper had run. The writing was illegible. He checked carefully, tearing them off one by one, frustrated to have come so far, to be so close to the goal and yet to fail. Then he realized that some notes had been stuck on top of other notes. Under 3 wet, illegible messages, he found one that was dry and clear. There was a complete phone number with the 617 area code for the vicinity of Boston where he lived. The note was signed Lucy. His alarm clock went off. He woke up with that number in his head. He tripped getting out of bed and crawled to his desk where he wrote down that number and the name Lucy. His mind was racing. This was revolutionary. This could be tangible proof of the existence of dream space. That would mean not only that people could share dream experiences, but also that the soul was separate from the body, and as the ancient Greeks had believed, it left the body when you slept and returned to it when you woke. And if there was a soul that was separate from the body, then maybe it could persist after the body died in dream space or some other realm of being, and perhaps it could move to another body. One mind-bending possibility after another raced through his mind, but all of this depended on the information being accurate. There had to be someone named Lucy at that number, someone who had participated in the experiment. Pete tried to calm down. He got dressed. He had breakfast. He lifted the receiver of his phone, but hesitated to dial the number. Discovery and proof that all of mankind shared a common dream space was a monumental discovery. That realm transcended ordinary space like a portal, enabling him to instantaneously cover vast physical distances, and it might even transcend time, making time travel possible. He was elated by the possibilities. He felt privy to the secrets of the universe, and he didn't want to dash it by dialing that number and hearing a mechanical recording saying that the number was out of service or there was no such number. He went for a run to try to calm down, but turned around before he had gone a block and raced back and dialed. It rang. No answer, but also no recording saying that it was a bad number. After 5 rings, it went to a taped answering machine recording. Hello, this is Lucy. Please leave a message after the beep. Lucy! Her name was Lucy. He left a message. Hello, Lucy. I got your number and your name from a phone booth in Australia. I wasn't there physically. I was there in dream space. Australian Aborigines believe we all go to an alternate reality. When we sleep, we all go to the same alternate reality. Thousands of people from around the world planned an experiment communicating over a global computer network. We performed that experiment last night, trying to dream of a phone booth in the Australian outback near Alice Springs. In our dreams, we were to leave messages at the phone booth and hope that someone else from our group would see that message and remember it, and when waking and make contact with the sender, confirming that dream space is real. You are the proof that it is real. We have to talk. We have to meet. Lucy called back an hour later. She lived a couple miles away from him in Dedham, Massachusetts. They met for lunch at a sandwich shop in downtown Dedham. She was intrigued. She had never heard of the experiment. She had nothing to do with that message appearing in his dream, but her phone number was unlisted, and she didn't know anyone and he didn't know anyone that she knew, and yet he had her number and name. They were still talking at 8 p.m. when the shop closed. They had forgotten to eat supper. They were hungry. They weren't hungry. They weren't thirsty. They still wanted to talk. They went to her place. They fell in love. They married. They had 3 boys and a Cocker Spaniel. And never again did either of them return to the phone booth in dream space. If you enjoyed this story, please let me know in comments, and I'll do more of the same. You can find my books at Amazon. My name again is Richard Seltzer, as an Alka-Seltzer. My most recent books are Parallel Lives, Beyond the Fourth Door, and Nevermind. They can be read in any order. They're independent stories with overlapping theme and styles. Each presents a different view of reality, a different way of trying to make sense of the mysteries of life.